right. We return. So, this topic, and before we get into there, I want to talk to you about Battery Station's food co-op program that they've put together for our listenership, and I want you to participate in that. Before we get too much further down the road, we'll wrap on that. But this segment is going to be, what is domestic law enforcement terrorism, and why and how has it become an epidemic in the United States of America? So, ride with us for this segment. I think you'll find it informative and valuable to you. If you like that segment I just did about AR-15 rifles, I'd love to hear from you. By all means, send me an email and just say, hey, I like it. I'd like to hear more topics like that, or less. And kind of give me some feedback on what you guys want to hear, because this is a program that, I want you to tune in and listen every day. And I know sometimes it's nice to get away from the political aspects of things a little bit, even if it's only just a segment once in a while. I know an awful lot about weapons. I was, an armorer and a fairly competent gunsmith in my time, and so I'm certainly in a position, and I have a lot of knowledge about weaponry and ballistics and ammunition and things like that. So I can certainly, expound on those kinds of things. And things, maybe it's not that topic at all. Maybe it's about how should we be a better prepper? How can we, what do we need in a basic bug-out bag? Or how do we obtain the right ingredients? Or things along those, of that nature, and along those lines. If you like that kind of topic, give me a shout. Send me an email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. And I'll be happy to try to meet that request. Okay. We're gonna diverge here for a moment, and we're going to look at another topic altogether, which is the issue of domestic law enforcement. Now, for the record, if this is something new to you, I'm surprised, because we have been inundated lately, and it's not just that the news is more prevalent and there's more outlets talking about it. I'm sure that's some aspect of it. But the truth is, we are having and experiencing, as we speak, a rise in the police state of the United States of America. What we're seeing is a terrible, and I do mean terrible, migration towards law enforcement, which is increasingly being utilized for military-like deployments. And we're talking about the most silly and arcane and idiotic things that these law enforcement agencies are being tasked with, and they're approaching them as if every incident that they go out on a warrant service requires them to shoot first and ask questions later. Now, I posted a story up this morning that I found very disturbing. In fact, I posted quite a few of them. So, the issue of, and I'll give you an example of a couple of them. But one of them, and I was really mad when I read these this morning. There was a young boy of 17 years old. The police knocked on his door the other day. They were there for his father, and his father was on probation. Don't know or care for what. And apparently he had missed a probation meeting or something he was supposed to be attending. And so the father wasn't home. The kid answered the door. He asked who was there through the door. There was no answer. He opened the door up, and he had a Wii controller, a video game controller, in his hand. One of the female officers there fired immediately, and he was killed. That's one story of literally thousands upon thousands of stories of people who were completely innocent, operating, in many cases, not even involved with the police. I mean, if you knew and you studied any of the information out there about how many people are killed in no-knock raids where the police entered the wrong home, the wrong address, or the informant gave them information that turned out to be false later on. But they go in there with guns blazing, and they're killing American citizens. Killing them. Lots of them. And I do mean lots. There are as many people killed by law enforcement forces domestically right here in the United States since 9/11 as there were in all of Iraq for the past since 9/11. In other words, more Americans were killed since 9/11 by police than were killed in the entire same period in Iraq. Radley Balco is an author. He writes for a number of different organizations, not the least of which is the Cato Institute, but he's also he's a a columnist for the Huffington Post. And he has got a book out there that's called Overkill, The Rise of Paramilitary Police in America. Now, to be honest with you, this publication is probably about, at this stage, probably 7 or so years old. And at the end of it, I think it came out around 2006 or something. And at the end of it, he has literally pages and pages and pages and 100 pages, half the book is stories of innocent people, either wrongly accused or they knocked on the wrong door, or they didn't knock at all and they just pounded the door down with a ram, and Grandpa comes out in his skivvies with a double-barrel shotgun, thinking he's being home invaded by those hooligans down the street. Who wouldn't think that? These police don't knock anymore. These are all no-knock warrants. And when you have a scenario where law enforcement is being taught and encouraged to know and understand military tactics, this is what you're going to have. And there is no doubt about it. These accidents that are occurring are not accidents. DLE Terrorism. That's what I call it. Domestic Law Enforcement Terrorism. Why do I say that? Well, the headlines are replete with thousands of cases of people being abused. I mean, I've posted up on our Facebook page this morning. A woman was pulled over by a police officer for driving in the high occupancy vehicle lane. When she told him that she was filming him on her iPhone, he attempted to grab the phone from her, tried to pull her out of the truck. She leaned over, jumped into the passenger seat. He ended up taking her to prison, or taking her to jail, and she stayed overnight in the jail. Well, he told her she was arrested for a felony. With all due respect, apparently these law enforcement officers are taught the tactics of how to maim, kill, and injure, but they're not taught the law, because the Supreme Court just recently passed and not so recently that they shouldn't have known about it. We're talking a year or two ago, a couple of years ago, I think it was, 2 years, that it is within the purview of your First Amendment right to video police officers during their dutiful services, whether it's towards you or you are a third party. End of argument, ladies and gentlemen. And any cop who doesn't know that by now is telling you a lie. They know it. They just don't like being filmed because it provides evidence. In another case, the cop assaults a guy who was recording him arresting someone else in a Brooklyn subway station. And you see, these police arrest these people for recording them. But more often than not, these altercations get out of hand. Look at Kelly Thomas, which I've had up on our website. That particular case is one of horrific consequences. I mean, Kelly Thomas was a flat-out, unmitigated, no holds barred, no doubt, no semblance of doubt, no shadow of a doubt in your mind, a murder. Murder. And those two cops, they're walking free. There was a case that wasn't so long ago. I believe it was in, I think it was Massachusetts or Connecticut, where someone who worked in a laboratory was tampered with the evidence in over 40,000. And I want you to hear that number again, because we're not talking about 400. We're not talking about 4,000. We're not talking about anything but the staggering sum of 40,000 cases where this individual tampered with the evidence from a laboratory, and people are spending their days behind bars based on that evidence. That's not inexcusable. That person, let me put it to you this way. There is nothing you can do to that government official who tampered with that evidence that would make up for the 40,000 people that are sitting in jail. Certainly some percentage of them are innocent. And by the way, what's the cost to the taxpayers for that little indiscretion? Because every one of those 40,000 is entitled to a completely new trial. There's a story here of officers repeatedly, not once, repeatedly spraying mace inside of a woman's private parts to, quote, punish her. See, this is far beyond the situation of, I've got to restrain these people for my safety. What we're seeing now is a sadistic pleasure that is coming from this. I read an article the other day about a guy who his father was, he went out, his father is neurologically impaired, has had some kind of a neurological impairment that makes him not be able to hold on to things. He was smoking a cigarette outside. He dropped the cigarette. He's in very poor health. The son went out. The police officer saw him drop the cigarette and was going to write him a ticket for $1,000. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, right off the bat, anything else you say, you cannot justify a $1,000 ticket for dropping a cigarette on the ground. I don't care how much of an environmental Nazi you are. And the guy came out and said, he's disabled. Let me try to pick up the cigarette. And, you know, we don't really have $1,000 to pay this ticket. And he wasn't being a litter bug. He was just incapacitated. The cop wasn't accepting that. They got into an altercation. The cop had shot this guy in his genitals with a taser and stood there while the mother stood there screaming, looking at her and looking her in the eye like I'm looking at you right now each time he pulled the trigger, knowing that she was watching her son being tortured. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not police work. That's something we'd expect from the Inquisition. That's something that we would expect to see in the prisons of Iraq under Saddam Hussein. That's something that we would expect to see in Mubarak's Egypt. That's something we would expect to see out of Nazi Germany. The truth of the matter is, we have a very serious, and I do mean serious, epidemic of domestic law enforcement terrorism being propagated, promulgated, and employed and deployed against American citizens. And it is time that it ceased. The truth is, we need to stop being politically correct about what it is. It's not police brutality. It's terrorism. How am I defining that? Terrorism is the use of fear to change behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, what's happening here is domestic law enforcement terrorism. Make no mistake about it. Murder by cop, assault by cop. These are an epidemic and a blight on our nation. 17-year-old boy shows up at the door with a Wii game controller in his hand, you know, the kind that you play tennis with. Cop, I'm sure, looking up, sees motion with the hand, thinks gun. Pow, pow, pow. Kid's dead. Was that warranted? I mean, first of all, why do you have multiple law enforcement officers going to a scene to get a guy who's already on probation for a probation violation? Nothing he could have done, short of some other kind of murder or something along those lines, warranted multiple officers on a no-knock warrant execution. And I use the word execution with the pun intended. This young fella, 17-year-old kid, he was sitting down to watch a movie on his Wii. He was in the ROTC, and he was joining the Marines. That was his life plan for the next 10 years of his life. And his life was snuffed out. For what? For what? Because some officer can say, well, training took over. Then we've got a problem with the training you're receiving. The military has a phrase: we train as we fight and we fight as we train. But when domestic law enforcement, which has a completely different mandate and a completely different level of responsibility to the American citizen, is training in military tactics and fashion, and is utilizing those against the citizenry that they are supposedly supposed to be protecting and serving, we have a major disconnect. And I'm telling you, now is the time for it to end. I can find you within 2 hours 100 cases minimum where someone ended up dead and the department simply said the officer followed procedure. No reprimand, no one fired. That's inexcusable. There are no excuses. There are no exceptions. There are no explanations. Murder is murder. And it doesn't really matter whether you're wearing a uniform when you commit it or not. There's no justification for what was done to that young man. What it shows you, and what it should be telling you, is that our nation is on the brink, and I do mean on the brink, of a police state the likes of which the world has never seen. We're already entered. We've already gone through the door, and we are irrefutably and quite honestly, I believe, irretrievably and irreversibly within the confines and the construct of a totalitarian police state. It would take generations of law enforcement to get this mentality out of their minds. Is every cop dirty? No. Is every cop a killer? No. Is law enforcement a valuable and necessary thing for our nation? Of course. But there is a difference between law enforcement and the imposition of domestic terrorism by men in blue uniforms instead of green or camouflage. Make no mistake about it, America. Where we are headed is a place where you've ignored, and for a very good reason, because you know, understand, and I believe that you have come to the conclusion that what is going to happen in this nation is so horrific, you don't want to face that reality. We're not talking about the federal government out of control. We're not talking about your state government out of control. We're talking about the local police in your city, in your town. Maybe you'd only have a sheriff's office because you live in a rural location where there isn't a city to have a police force. Many of these people and these men and women put their lives on the line every day. And I'm certainly not trying to take anything from anyone who is righteously in law enforcement. But I got to tell you, I look at you as a law enforcement officer who takes umbrage at what I say, and I throw that right back at you and say, wait a second. We say constantly, if you're, and about, everybody wants to characterize Muslims as the threat, right? Well, and then there's a lot of Muslims that say, wait a second, being Muslim is not necessarily, doesn't mean you're a terrorist. And we say, great, then prove it to us and weed your own ranks out. You separate them. You take responsibility and remove them. And if you are unwilling to do that, or you refuse to do that, then you are complicit. That's a message to every law enforcement agent out there. And I don't care whether you are Barney Fife to the highest federal agency. You have an obligation to look around you. And when there are dirty officers, you separate them and you protect us from them. You know who's a nutcase on your team. I'm telling you, America, this is getting ugly. And it has reached epidemic levels when we have had more 5,000 Americans dead since 9/11 at the hands of police. You know how many people we lost in Iraq since 9/11? 3,500. 5,000 American citizens dead since 9/11 at the hands of police. We've lost 2,000 in Afghanistan, thereabouts. So it won't be much longer at the pace we're at where we will have had more Americans killed since 9/11 than we have had killed in war by local police. You've been listening to America's Voice now. I got to tell you, this is a major issue. It's a major problem. And you should be cognizant of it and trying to determine how you can change this and if you're in law enforcement, resist it. And if you're not in law enforcement, make your community aware of it and do what you need to do to make sure that your family is not subjected to this. Those of you who are in law enforcement, you know who you are. This is a serious problem, and it's time that you admitted there's an addiction to violence within the police. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Find us live on the web at americasvoicenow.com. patriotfb.org. You can find us on patriotfb.com. You can find us on facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And you can find every program that we do on YouTube at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. I encourage you and ask you to please share these videos with people within your circle of influence. Have a great weekend. God bless. Goodbye.